Welcome to our podcast exploring a number of things around large language models, ChatGPT, generative AI, a whole host of TLAs that we're going to get into. I'm Andy Murray, the Executive Director of the Major Projects Association, and today I'm joined by Lawrence Rowland. Welcome, Lawrence.
Hi, Andy. Nice to speak to you.
Lawrence, we know each other from the hackathons and various other times we've bumped into each other, but I've been sort of caught by your LinkedIn activities over the past, 3 or 4 months, possibly a little bit further back than that, but you've really upped the ante in the last few months. And your LinkedIn profile, Lawrence, I'll just do an introduction for you, and then perhaps I'll offer you a chance to embellish it a bit further. But your LinkedIn profile says sharing one new GPT for projects every week. And actually, I think you're over delivering on that, because I suspect you do 2 or 3 a week in most weeks. But there's at least one that you do. But Lawrence, you describe yourself as a project professional, but with an appetite for data and data analytics. And you've been exploring the world of AI on behalf of the profession for the past few years. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Andy. Yeah, so I come from an engineering projects background. Large capital projects, and then sort of the last 10-15 years I moved into projects and portfolio management as a function. And then the last 5 years I basically describe myself as an enthusiastic amateur, if you like, in data analytics and AI, because basically it's a lot easier than sort of 20 years ago when I tried and failed at that. So, and there's just so much to explore, but you can go a long way even as an amateur with it. And I think that's an important point that people are missing at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm going to describe you as our sort of data analytics AI explorer on behalf of the projects profession. So let's get in. So I want to sort of demystify some of these things to start off with, or rather, I'm going to start slow and basic, and then we can sort of progress onto the heavier aspects of this topic later. So I kicked off with all the the TLAs, but let's just get a handle on those. So I use the term large language models. ChatGPT is a large language model, and that's a part of a broader umbrella of what we call generative AI, meaning it produces output or content. Is that a reasonable, in my lay terms, is that an okay description about what we're going to talk about?
Absolutely, that's perfect. And I think for me that the simple one-liner on LLMs or large language models, of which ChatGPT is, if you like, the sort of cardinal example at the moment, is just to think that you can instruct and query now with natural language, and I think that's the main thing to take away from that. And that's very new and very exciting, because that's what we use all the time to communicate with each other. And now you can do that with, if you like, a computer.
Yeah, and you think about it in the earlier days of computing, we had to be very precise with our command prompts, and even with sort of browsers, we don't ask questions necessarily in natural English. We think about the keywords that we want to use, and we use plus and ands and so on to help us with that. So there's this natural language ability to use it, which I think has stepped up its usefulness. But when I've been playing with it, it's not just the fact that it's a single question that we might ask, or instruction using natural language, but it remembers what we've asked of it. So if we ask follow-up questions or supplementary questions, we get answers that are built upon the conversation, like you and I are doing now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's natural language, but natural language is a dialogue, as if you like a turn-taking conversation. Bang on.
Yeah. So let's dive into your experiments then, or your exploration, these posts once per week. So I've been looking at a few of them, and if we just start off with, although we use a natural language, there's been some additions to ChatGPT, and it allows you to put, for example, drawings or images in, and then the output from that would be perhaps a description of what's in the image or drawing. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think it's even more powerful than that. And I think that the sort of main way to capture that is as a capability, if you like, is they talk about sort of multimodal or multimodality here. So it started with text or language as a modality, and it already could do that across multiple languages, and it could also do that across multiple sort of, if you like, programming languages as well as languages. But now it's doing images. So in other words, it understands and puts in the same place. If you think about it, it's putting it in the same place in its brain, if you like, an image of a rabbit to the way that you would describe a rabbit. So just like we do, we often recall the image at the same time and in the same way, effortlessly as a word. And soon there's going to be video. There's already a sort of spoken language as well. And so you should see that as progression. But the multimodal is one of the reasons why it's a good time now for people to sort of jump in, because we've only, if you like, got 2 modes. And so as those proliferate, if you understand the principle that you can either prime it or prompt it, if you like, with an image to get it started, or with language, whichever works for you, then you can just get going straight away.
Yes. So one of the examples you give is an image of a barn in Cumbria, a dilapidated barn, and you use the generative AI capability to create a description of that barn in terms of its features and so on. And then I've seen you sort of build up over weeks with that one sort of project idea, where you've then said, right, we want to do a refurbishment of this barn, or actually some terrace buildings, I think you used in that later example. And you've got a scope of work from that, which is, based on an image, you've got the description. You now say, right, the next step is we want to do a refurbishment project. Can you give me a list of things we would typically do on a refurbishment project? So what prompted you to sort of play with those sorts of ideas and sort of explain the iterations you've done with that since?
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start. I would start, if I was starting now, I would start either with an image or with a text. But the trick is, I think, to ask the question as directly as possible, and don't talk down to it in the sense of ask a difficult question, and then if it struggles with that, then maybe ask an easier question, because what you'll find is that actually it knows as well as you actually what you're asking. So in other words, if you're trying to, say, refurbish a barn, then don't say, please describe the barn, or please do this or that with the barn. Just ask for the whole project, if you like, right?
Yeah.
And see how much it will do. And I think so it's almost, for me, it's a more general point of how to engage with these things is we're still in year 0, if you like, when it comes to some of these things in general release, and the capabilities are just going to continue to get much more powerful. And so the main thing to unlock is just to learn that you need to keep being ambitious for it, right?
Yeah.
And then as the new capabilities, which will be a bit even bigger, arrive, then you've got the right mindset. So I'll even go back very briefly to actually 11 months ago, and I'm going to rerun this prompt. 11 months ago, I asked it to, when ChatGPT sort of just released, I actually asked it to run a project for me to create some railway track from Sedbergh to Kendal. And said to run it, and I'll give it an account code, and that I was its employee, and just crack on and deliver the project. And it kind of struggled. It made some good progress, but it kept on reverting to me. And that was 11 months ago, right? And so I think for me, you start with that question, and then you expect that it probably won't manage to do it all. I'm going to rerun it on its 1-year anniversary and see how it does, and I'll run it again in a year's time. But I think at high level, that's the kind of level you should be doing it. And luckily, if you're a key person in projects, you're probably very good at specifying work and giving instructions and writing scope. So you're perfectly positioned already to bring that into actually talking and instructing at the right level. It's just, don't make the mistake of just starting with, I want you to do this small bit of scope here.
And I remember that post from 11 months ago, because it was December 2022. If we want to put a timestamp on it, was when ChatGPT or OpenAI launched ChatGPT on an open basis, so for the public, so to speak. And I think that's when I first saw some of your posts exploring in a way that was a bit more structured and inquisitive in terms of what you're looking to get from it. But I remember the post in terms of it was thinking about route selection, it was flagging up, planning and consents challenges, it was flagging up, interfaces, and I thought it was quite a considered response, although it did struggle to say I'm now going to take it forward. But it was some of the things that came out I thought were reasonable in terms of giving you that starter to think about. And likewise with your barn refurbishment, what I saw through some iterations, you started off with this scope statement, you then refined it, you then got a work breakdown structure, you then refined it, you then asked it for some estimates. And one of the things I saw that fascinated me, you said, assume this project is in Manchester or somewhere, I can't remember where you said it was going to be. And you got a 3-point estimate based upon typical costs of work, from that area. And your view, was that a reasonable, did you try and benchmark what came back from it?
That was pushing it. I mean, so the thing on that one was, I would give it like sort of 3 out of 10 for that one. But
right.
Again, I think the point is it for any given capability. I mean, obviously there's some capabilities it will never achieve, but I think the point is for any given capability that you think it can't do yet, if you like, just wait 3 months, right, and play with the capability that it's got. So on that one. What it did is, because it can now browse the internet, so it can look up costs, right? And so it did that, and it actually went and looked for, different sort of costs on the internet for Manchester. But as you can imagine, if we spent 20 minutes doing that, we would end up with some highly indifferent values ourselves. But the point is that it could do that. And that it did try to improve that estimate. But in terms of its capability now, for that particular bit, I give that a 3 out of 10. But then this is where I think people often don't want to use it because they think, it can't do this and it can't do that. And I think if you've got a mental log, if you like, on any given month of, if I asked it to do this, it would be a 7 out of 10. At the moment, that's a 9 out of 10. Then you'll be able to sort of turbocharge your organisation in terms of actually asking the right questions of your team and allowing them to use these sort of large language models in the right way, whilst also not shutting off like the near future, right? So.
Yeah, and in terms of those, that 3 out of 10 for estimates, so I guess the cost estimators listening into this podcast will be relieved that they're only 3 out of 10. But actually, it would still require a cost estimator, someone who's knowledgeable on cost estimating, to be asking the questions and sort of validating the results that come back, or
Absolutely, yeah.
Using their own experience on top of it. It's interesting because when ChatGPT was first launched, it was trained only up until 2020, if I recall from the launch announcements, and it didn't have access to the internet. So that's something that's been turned on relatively recently, and I don't think many people are aware that ChatGPT does now access the internet. So that sort of stepped it up a level, isn't it, in terms of its value?
Absolutely. So there are actually sort of 3 related developments in that area, actually. So the first one is it's moved from a training set of, I can't remember, I think it's January 2021 or something like that, would be the last one it did. In the last month or so, it's moved up to being, its training set is now reflective of April 2023. So even if it doesn't browse, then you get the benefits of that. The second thing is that, as in the last couple of weeks, you don't need to specify which clever capabilities you're going to ask of it. So in other words, you don't need to say, I'm going to use your data analytics, or I'm going to use your images, or I'm going to use your browsing. You just give the LLM a problem, and it will choose the tool that it seems most appropriate. And then the last thing about sort of, as you say, is that you can add documents that are completely contemporary, if you like. So, for example, back to your example, if you're a surveyor and you've got a table of costs, then you can just upload that document, and it will look up that table of costs. So I think, again, it's just understanding this thing as essentially think of it as like a prototype agent with knowledge, and you can give it more knowledge that's contextual, right?
Yeah.
And it has access to tools, it also increasingly, and this is one to worry about less, but it's got access to actions, so it can actually call on sort of other sort of programming APIs for other services and do that. But that's something that's a bit harder to
and in terms of that access to the internet, and this is a part of the challenge, and I know with some of our members calling for data trusts and so on, but accessing what's out there in the World Wide Web, so to speak, lots of the interesting things are behind firewalls or paywalls. So it's only really finding out what's in the public domain rather than those things that organizations such as the data providers and the sort of data intermediaries would be keeping behind, quite rightly, behind some paywalls or firewalls.
Yeah.
So this is where, if you were using it in your own organization, you could point it to or give it access to your own information. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, obviously the big proviso, and again, this comes into the emerging capabilities thing of being highly aware of when it doesn't do something yet fully to your satisfaction, but keeping on watching it until it does. Right. So it's been an ongoing issue about sort of what do you do with confidential data. And obviously, as a company, you need to assure yourself of that, and there are limitations with that. So you need to do your homework if you're uploading anything confidential, anything sort of GDPR and that kind of thing. But there are a whole number of workarounds, and OpenAI is very conscious of it and that kind of thing. But if for example, you're starting with some of your own data on a public project, and it's something that it's sort of safe to try, maybe because it's been released, an example would be, what you could do as a play, right, is you could go to something like High Speed 2 publications, okay, and like sort of every month you see 20 or 30 different publications coming out, meeting minutes, surveys, etc. That's a great place to start, because you're uploading stuff that's public, but it's got everything you need, if you like, about the project definition to then really understand those capabilities. So that's where I'd start. Another thing to say is I think obviously the data bit is very, very important. I think there's two things to say about it. I think the first thing is to say that at the moment, I think that microdata, if you like, is underrated. And what I mean by that is that we've all got little bits of data, if you like, that are highly specific to a particular use case that we're doing, but you just might not think of it as data, right? And actually, that microdata will be very powerful to actually give enough context for a question, and also will probably have less sort of confidentiality questions around it, because maybe it's just your task list for the last 3 weeks and you're just using acronyms or whatever, etc. But then the other bit around this is that one of the key capabilities at a high level that this whole wave is, if you like, is bringing in, is that knowledge, right, as opposed to data or complementary to data, is something that it's bringing in and it's making far more accessible. And knowledge, which is, if you like, been based upon data in the past and organized, etc., it has got access to great knowledge. So, for example, ChatGPT is a much better sort of M&E engineer than me. It's a much better anything than me, right? Except for in 2 or 3 different things. Because if you think about all of the kind of books and the papers and the research papers it knows, then in most contexts, it has better knowledge than you, and therefore you can often lean on the knowledge rather than on the data.
Yeah, so it's a bit like in any team where you've got that one very knowledgeable person in your team on a particular topic, you would go and talk to them, wouldn't you? So it's exactly the same. It's pulling on the different talents you might have in your team, and you just think, okay, it's an expert in something I'm not. Go and consult and get some advice. Just want to pull up on a couple of other things.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been seeing is I saw the launch of GPT-4, the video, if anyone wants to just go on YouTube, and it was doing someone's tax return, and it loaded in. It was US launch, so it was US tax law, but it loaded in 10,000 pages of the latest US tax legislation and guidance, and then gave it a fictitious couple that were doing their tax return. They just sold a property and viewers had some capital gains and so on, and he got it spot on. And it was really interesting because it doesn't actually have a maths engine, so it was producing numbers based upon what it would expect those numbers to be. It was fascinating, which is how humans do maths in many respects. But what got me thinking about that is that we could be doing the same for things like engineering standards or national planning policies or whatever it might be. But we could give the things that our project needs to work to, the legislation, the guidance, the policies. We could be loading that up or giving it and then saying when we're planning our project or when we're doing our schedules or when we're doing our scope or our estimates, whatever we might be asking of it, to make sure that it's consistent with those policies or guidance or rules that we need to apply.
I think that's a really powerful sort of use case for the medium term, and I think you mustn't underrate that. I think on particular projects and programs, I think that's too early to rely on that.
Right. So it's sort of it's heading in that direction, but we're not there yet on those.
I think my personal opinion is actually pretty good at it, but that you can't and shouldn't rely on it as a practitioner yourself. I think the way I think of it is at the moment it's mostly acts like an enthusiastic intern, right? So it's like a fresh graduate, knows everything, full of confidence, okay, will quite happily sort of go through that and will always come up with the first answer, right? So that's the way in which you should treat it, and you should learn the capabilities by it. So I absolutely agree, you should be asking questions of regulator. You should upload regulations and ask it questions and see how well it does. But you need yourself to get comfortable with actually what that does. And what you'll find is it will like portray regulations in a way that you hadn't thought of, because it's almost inherently multidisciplinary, because it understands every discipline. So it's much better at kind of like, say, for example, you've got project regulations and you've got sector regulations like nuclear, and let's say you've got sort of technology and you're trying to think about something at the intersection of those three. It's probably better than you at most of it for the first answer at an intersection of those three domains. But for then the real answer, you'll need to either be yourself an expert, you need to know where to lead it.
So I love that description you just gave, sort of an enthusiastic intern or graduate. Actually, perhaps there's a bit of naivety in there as well. So it's got the knowledge but not the experience. Well, you have to, saying.
And it's exactly, and you have to understand the way that these products are being positioned for you as a user. Firstly, so there's obviously the thing gets trained on all of these documents and that kind of thing, and then it has this reinforcement learning with human feedback, RLHF it's called, where basically sort of developers score answers and then try and get it to like give more of the answers that a human would prefer. So you have to understand that that's part of what's going on, and there are weaknesses around that, which are still a lot of them being ironed out, but fundamentally it will want to please you, right? And also because it's being trained on, if you like, sort of history and our behaviours, etc., it will often double down, for example, right? So so a simple way of thinking of an example is if you ask it straight away for its opinion and then ask it to back it up and say what are the reasons why you should take that opinion, right? That is normally not the right way to do it, because what it will do is it will come up with a reasonably good answer, but it may well be wrong, right? Because it just like all of us, right? And then when you ask it, well, why do you say that? It will then ratiocinate. It will give good plausible reasons for why it answered that. Whereas
it's providing an argument rather than a check. So
what you should do, and I think so, what you should do is you first say, right, think about this, and then sort of, what will be some plausible arguments, etc., and then build up to, if you like, the big takeaway, right? And then why it thinks what it thinks.
It's interesting that I've seen some of your posts, Lawrence, where you publish the scripts and the prompts that you're using. And one I quite often see is you say, please check your answer, or can you give me another perspective? And I think that's then building up. So you get that sort of, some alternatives coming through that the human in the loop can sort of take away and make a decision on. The other things I've been seeing it being used for is it can generate code, because code is just another language. And often we think of whether that code could be Python or programming code, but things like Microsoft Excel, formulas are code. Even in Power BI and the dashboards that some of our members, project professionals and controls folk will be using, that's a form of code. So and I think that's something where, from a productivity perspective, if rather than trying to look things up or saying how can I do this, but being able to give a natural language description, this is the formula I would like, can you give me that formula, and you get it, I think is another powerful thing that we're perhaps underusing in our sort of everyday use of the tools that we've got available to us.
Exactly right. And I think, it's coding in the broader sense. So, for example, if you've got a language, a formal language, like a planning language, there's PDL in the project space. There's something like PDDL, for example, which is a planning language. There are ontologies, there are building construction ontologies that you can take different bits of BIM, etc., etc. And you can give it a document which defines that ontology, for example. And then you can ask it, you can depict the situation and ask it to describe it in that language.
Yeah.
Right? So you're exactly right. It's coding in the very broadest of sense, in the sense that many of the things that we do, certainly as teams, is essentially could be seen as code. We just don't think of it as that. Sort of preparing a schedule in many ways is a series of instructions in a sort of semi-formal language. So that, and as far as it's concerned, that's code.
That's code, yeah.
So specifically, the thing you can do right at the start, right, is you can ask it for code or ask it to explain code. So you can copy some code in, or you can ask it to generate some code, and then you can copy that code as a starter and copy it into, as you say, like an Excel form. You can ask it to give you an Excel formula and then copy it into Excel. So that's, if you like, stage one of what you can do. The other thing that you can do, if you have ChatGPT Plus, which unfortunately, just this morning, Sam Altman has temporarily switched off new subscriptions, but it will only be temporary. But I think he's temporarily got.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. So when it was launched in December 2022, it was free to register for. It was, I can't remember the caveat that it was called. It was effectively a beta product, wasn't it? It wasn't a full launch. Now is it $20 a month or something like that?
It's basically $20
GPT?
a month. If you're in the UK, it sort of works out around sort of £20, sort of with VAT and things like that. But when Sam Altman brings it back on, because the load reduces, I do recommend using it, because at the moment you're restricted to, I think, use the free model. Free model is brilliant, and I think it's 3.5 turbo is the model, I think, at the moment, and that kind of thing. And again, just push it on the questions, and then, if you like, when you have time or interest, move over to ChatGPT Plus, because the model is much better. And you can try it just for a month or two. You can just have, try it for a month and see if you use it.
And it's not just a better model. I think there's more features. Is that right? In terms of the amount of data you can upload to it, the size of the code you can put in, or the number of characters in the prompt window. It's great. Is that right?
Exactly that. And so let's just go back to where we started talking about this. Was around how you might use code as an example, as a possible kind of use case. So if you had ChatGPT Plus, for example, then there's what's called a code interpreter module that's now inherent to it, so you don't need to tell it. But what that does, it won't just give you a code block or a list of code. It will interpret, which is essentially running that code. So it can run that code in its own code environment and then give you an answer, which will often be a chart or or a number, etc., etc. And that is one of the things you get with ChatGPT Plus. You get the ability to upload images and files. And again, as you were saying earlier, because it's a conversation, you can upload those during the course of the conversation.
Yeah. And is it also, you can give it a persona, can't you? So you can say, for this interaction, assume you're a a project professional, or assume you're an architect, or assume you're a civil engineer, or whatever. So you can give it a persona so that the answers that come back are the answers that someone of that persona it would like you to give.
Exactly. And then you can do that to start with. The easiest way of doing that is just to do that in the prompt.
Right.
And then what you find is if you always find yourself, for example, saying, explain your answer, or do it as a project manager, or whatever it is you normally, if you say that 2/3 of the time, then there's in the settings, there's something called custom instructions. And then what you can do is you can add all of the kind of ways you would normally like it to answer. So for example, I tell it to be brief, and if I've got questions, I'll get back to it rather than to tell me and give me all the warnings. Sometimes sometimes it gives you lots of warnings and that kind of thing. And so what that essentially does is those custom instructions are essentially added onto the prompts that you always give. So it always sees your particular question, and then it always thinks of it in the context of those.
Okay, that's brilliant. So, Lawrence, I feel that sort of like a BBC broadcast, that for fear this is sort of coming across as product placement for OpenAI,
yes, you're right.
with the ChatGPT. There are alternatives. There are many others out there. We've got, obviously, Microsoft launched Copilot, which is not quite the same, but it's equivalent, but it's sort of embedded within the Microsoft suite. We've got Bard, and we've got various others, aren't there? Right. So the things we've been describing around ChatGPT, those features are generally equivalent in these other large language models as well. But obviously GPT's sort of got the early move advantage, and seems to be the one that most of us are using or playing with. Is that a fair reflection?
That's very fair, and it's a good point. It's almost like it is a better model in many ways, but there are bits where other models are better. But it's often, in terms of the user interface, it's often just quicker and better to get you going on that. But then I would encourage people then to try Google Bard, to use the OpenAI version within Bing, to use any sort of Microsoft sort of Copilot type functionality, to go to Claude, to go to Perplexity AI, which is another one which like sort of packages it up, etc., etc. And there are also a lot of open source models like Llama 2 and Falcon, etc., etc. And those tend to need a little. This is going to go very quickly, but at the moment you need a little bit of coding experience just to get those going. But that will fall away, and people will provide that very, very quickly. So you do have open source alternatives which are very powerful, and also have the advantage for some of the open source models that you actually know what it's been trained on. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think you're right about, I mean, for many of us, eventually it won't be just a choice of using one or another. We'll be using, potentially multiple or even all of them. And I had a quick look at the Copilot, and coming back to the natural language, being able to just put into a prompt, I would like a PowerPoint presentation that covers this. And it will knock up 80% of what you want to get in terms of structure and image and flow, and then you just add in some specifics. I'm just thinking, those people that are regularly, facilitating workshops or giving presentations or using PowerPoint or other slides as a form of communication, productivity is going to shoot up in terms of the time it takes to produce those, because ultimately we just want to focus on the message and the content, not on how to build the slide deck, which is.
So I think I'd echo what you're saying there. I think so. The way I would say it is that it doesn't matter which one you start with. The point is that play with one that works for you and that you enjoy working with, and that you'll naturally open up. Just like if you naturally, sometimes some people always start in Outlook in the morning, or they always start. They always open up their document, or some people will open up their Excel. Right. So what you want is to have something which doesn't interrupt your flow, and you want to be in that app ideally for sort of 1, 2, 3 hours or whatever. And so once you understand large language models as capability, you'll see them everywhere increasingly, including in your favorite app. And so it's just that familiarity, and so if I was in Word and I had sort of a Copilot switched on, then I wouldn't go out of the app. What I would do is I would use the facility in there, because now I know how valuable
it's
LLMs
embedded
are.
within the app. Yes.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I get it. So right, I'm looking at the time, and
Yes.
we like to keep this around about 30 minutes, but the topic's so fascinating. We've run over a bit. Just last week, I think it's a week ago, but maybe just a little bit longer than a week ago, if I've got this term right, ChatGPT or OpenAPI launched assistance with its
Yes.
ChatGPT. And again, if I can do my lay person's description of this, and then you correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially it means we can add, or we can create our own flavor of a GPT specific to a type, whether that is an estimating GPT, or whether that is a scheduling one, or I've seen one recently around helping people pass the APM's Chartered Project Professional. So it will come up with the prompts and the advice needed to put your submission in and to go through the process. Within that week, I did a quick look. There's something like 50 or so project-related ones that have come out. Am I right in describing what that assistance does, or do you want to come back in and just correct me?
Absolutely. I think just for people like sort of new into it, so you don't get lost. The first thing to do is, if you haven't done any of this, I would just start with straightforward ChatGPT or Google Bard or whatever, and don't worry about. And what you're describing is, they are assistants, but the kind of key name for them at the moment is GPTs. Okay, so, and they're kind of like, they're like early agents. So they're not calling them agents. So I agents as things that kind of can act in the world, because they can't really do that fully yet. So what you'd be looking for is sort of a GPT builder, or kind of, soon there'll be an app store for GPTs, which now the caveat, and the reason why to start with just basic prompts and things just for the first week or so, is firstly because you can only access those GPTs at the moment through ChatGPT Plus. And so just because Sam Altman shut it down temporarily, you're either already in the ecosystem and you understand what you're doing and you'll be able to access those, or you'll just get set up for disappointment in the next week. And if you start by going with the GPTs, but you need to understand that the GPTs are there, and that's just increasingly a way of packaging up knowledge and action and tools all together. So that's the way that they characterized it on their dev day.
And from what I've seen, is people are putting a suite of sort of documentation and knowledge in there, and giving it a label to say it's now set up for this, narrow sort of application. Is that right?
What you're seeing a lot, right? So it's really early days. So again, if you think of it as being, it's got this LLM, but it's got these three extra things. So it's got access to tools. So you can, when you create one of these, you'll say, well, yeah, you can use an image creator, or you can use the code interpreter, etc., etc. So it's got access to the tools. That's number one. Number two, it's got access to knowledge, which is what you're referring to. And you can upload up to 20 documents. And some of those documents can be hundreds of megabytes. I think the limit is something like 0.1 gigabytes. Some very, very large limit. So you can make some very large documents in there. So it's got access to knowledge. But the third bit that's been a bit underplayed up to now is instructions, right? So in the sense that which is essentially a series of prompts, if you like, that you can put in. So if on the kind of plain vanilla sort of LLM that you've been using, you've learned how to prompt it to get a certain result, which will often involve domain experience, right? So if you're a scheduler, you know what the sequence of steps is, then you can package that up, and people have packaged that up in the GPT and said, you do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And then the GPT will just walk through those steps.
So if I'm Transport for London, Network Rail, High Speed 2, or one of these sort of projects organisation where I've got whether it's GRIP or Pathway, but their project management method, So that could be uploaded as long as it would fit within that sort of 20 document limit, which probably most
which
wouldn't
you definitely
today.
would. Even Grip would.
Yeah.
You find a way of getting Grip on.
You find a way of sort of putting all the PDFs documents together into one large PDF and putting up. So you could get your project methodology into this assistant. And then instructions could be for preparing for one of the stage gates, for example, because there's 4 things you need to do, whether it's going through your assurance review board, your commercial review board, or whatever, preparing you for a stage gate.
Because and that's the thing. I think this is why the early GPTs at the moment, because it's a lot of the GPTs you're seeing are knowledge focused, which is great. But what people have done is essentially they just uploaded some documents in an area and said, like, sort of go for it.
Yeah.
So which is good, but what you'll find is the GPTs will start to get more nuanced. And so if you, for example, put up Grip, then if you just put up Grip and just do that, then the user still has to kind of struggle through if they're not familiar with prompting these things as to, well, what am I going to do with it? Because otherwise you just end up. So what if someone is, for example, always putting through like 10 projects a month through Grip and setting up the boards, then they know the steps that they take. So they might say, sort of go to step 1, assemble the documentation, ask the user to upload the project brief, etc., review that as per this section, right, etc. It's incredibly powerful because you can essentially sort of walk someone through a large corpus of knowledge, but because you're a domain expert, you know how to traverse it.
Yeah,
right?
Fascinating. So there's sort of concept of a peer review. We might be changing who we think of as a peer in those things. I'm with you. From some of the examples I've seen, they're sort of a bit trivialized in terms of what's been uploaded, and you've just been sort of left to sort of muddle through. But I think with some proper design and thinking it through, it feels that we're on the cusp of something quite brilliant, really, in terms of as a methodologist, someone that spent 20 odd years developing and putting methods and frameworks into organizations. My mind's now racing away of all the possibilities of how you could not do that. The alternative to creating all those documents in the first place. I think we are on a point of change. Right, Lawrence, we're out of time. So this is fascinating. So what I would like to do is to invite you back perhaps in 3 months' time after you've done your 1-year anniversary of the railway to where was it from to?
From Kettles to Sedberg.
Right. Okay. We'll see how that gets on next time round.
That railway, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure if we do 3 months' time, we'll be talking about things we can't even imagine at this point in time that will be released that we weren't expecting. So brilliant. Thank you very much, and look forward to catching up with you at some point soon.
Thanks, Andy. Great to speak.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone listening to us today. And if you want to know more, there are events in our events program, both fringe and seminars on the topic of project data and analytics. So go onto the website, have a look, and please register. Thank you.